Thank you to the organizers to invite me to this event. Actually, I was at the Research Days in 2013, and it was a very nice experience. So I'm pretty sure that also these days will be quite exciting and fruitful. As I pointed out, I changed the title of the talk because I decided somehow to show you more robots and more things moving rather than models and concepts. I hope you will enjoy. So today I will talk about, the focus will be on robot swarms, and I will present part of the research I've been doing the last 5-6 years, and mostly research I've been doing while I was at the Le Molle Institute for Artificial Intelligence in Lugano, in Switzerland. And I will have a special focus on how we can include the human in the loop of operations of a robot swarm. It's a fact that actually having humans and robots teaming up is a trend now. We want to achieve this. This is like quite like 1 year ago, a special issue for IEEE robotics automations, precisely having humans and robots working together. And the idea is somehow to make this happening in industrial, let's say, structured environments, but also in more unstructured, open environments, which is way more difficult, of course. But somehow this is happening. The ultimate goal is to set up what is termed a mixed initiative interaction system, or more generically, a shared autonomy between humans and robots. Basically, a sort of peer-to-peer systems where humans and robots have both autonomy and they can take initiative on both sides, and basically they collaborate as we would do in a team. Of course, there are many things to deal with. In particular, I want to point out the problem of having context awareness, because if I need to collaborate with somebody, I need to understand what is the context, and also somehow I need to get like a model of my collaborator. So there's a long way actually to go, but this is where we are aiming to. So what about actually robot swarms? Because this was using 1-2 robots is always already very difficult, but what when we have many robots? Of course, the idea of having humans and robot swarms working together, cooperating, is quite appealing because there are so many application fields that could enjoy, I would say, require the presence of multiple robots. This is just sketching some applications, like in cleaning, farming, warehouse operations, vehicle routing, search and rescue. These are all situations, scenarios, where somehow you can split the area. You need to cover a distributed system, so you need multiple resources being deployed. Of course, if we think just to deploy robots, maybe it's not going to be enough, because having a human in the loop is a way to devise high-level plans, to correct situations, to use higher cognition, to use also our somehow very specialized sensory motor abilities. So this is to say we would like to have also a human here to make the system being really deployed in the real world. However, when we have to deal and interact with multiple robots, let's say if the potentialities get multiplied by n, also the issues get multiplied by n. And also, in a sense, one thing is to interact with this guy that has, this is like state-of-the-art humanoid robot from Boston Dynamics. It's super expensive, but okay, can do very, we can interact, I would say, probably in the future, most likely we interact with humans. But if I have to interact with very small robots that have limited capabilities, somehow this poses new problems, maybe stronger challenges. So in this view, with our group, we somehow wrote down a sort of agenda towards mixed initiative human swarm interaction. Okay, so what was the idea? The idea is, okay, let's try to understand what do we need, at least to start with, from the human side and the swarm side. And let's try to produce products, research in these directions. Because in the end, as a grassroots process, in the end, we might end up with what we want, which is really a mixed initiative human-swarm interaction system. So the idea was to say, okay, the minimal thing we want to have, and let me say, all these things were somehow defined having in mind as application search and rescue and emergency support, post-disaster scenarios, because we had a big project in Switzerland. Civil protection, Swiss civil protection was heavily involved. So it was actually very nice to talk to the professionals and say, hey, listen, but what if I bring a robot, 2 robots, 3 robots? And they say, hey, if you want to bring these guys, you need this, this, and that. So it was very nice actually to talk to professionals and hear what are their needs. So the idea was, hey, a human should be able to do what? Well, definitely to provide high-level action plans. If I'm in the field saying, hey, you guys now search in the street, and you guys search in that part, okay? Then, of course, the swarm needs to have autonomy to realize this somehow. Also, we want to have sort of soft to hard control commands. With hard control commands, I mean teleoperation. But even while doing teleoperation, if I'm teleoperating and going this, the robot should be able to stop. So to use its autonomy to avoid to crash. With soft, the idea could be if I have to control a swarm, it's quite difficult. I cannot control one by one you, but somehow say, okay, you follow my direction and go take that exit. Also, the human should be able to help robots to overcome issues. If a door is closed, instead of spending billions to create a robot that opens a door, maybe it's easier to have a human just open the door. But we need to have this in the system, okay? So the robots need to ask for this, and the human should be ready there for doing it. And in general, what we need somehow to do all this is to have some way to easily, effectively interact with the swarm. From the swarm side, well, what we need is definitely the ability to perform some core tasks in full autonomy. Okay, what are core tasks? Of course, they depend from the application scenario, right? But if I think to have at least a mobile swarm, a core task is, for instance, navigation. Without, being deployed in an environment and navigate it. Or if I have to search for survivors, again, to split, or coordinate in order to search for specific targets. So to have something that, once I provide high-level action plans, they are able to implement it. And, okay, should be able to interleave autonomy and human supervision. So if human intervenes, the swarm should be ready to get this intervention, and somehow vice versa. Of course, in order to do this, since we are talking about the swarm, we need some basic abilities to self-coordinate and self-organize. And definitely this is the same as this, as be able to actively interact with humans. And this proactively, this is actually very important as kind of future in the sense, yeah, if I see and lock a door, the idea to look for a human that try to open this for me. Okay, so based on this agenda, let's call it a wish list in order to obtain a human swarm interaction mixed initiative system. I defined the roadmap for the talk today. So essentially, I will present some building blocks that are reflected in the previous, in our agenda. I will show that some work we have been doing in the idea of obtaining what we want as ultimate goal, which is this mixed initiative. In particular, I will describe as a core task autonomous navigation in human spaces. So I will describe a typical swarm approach for robot navigation. When I say typical, taking inspiration from the natural system, actually, precisely accounting for the fact that the swarm is not alone, but is navigating in a place where humans are. Then, increasing somehow the complexity and in the involvement of the human in the system, I will describe our work in terms of interaction, self-control, and mutual feedback. So basically, the idea will be to actually show a vision-based gesture language to control a swarm. That has some limitations. We'll describe this. And then also something which is a wearable-based system to interact in dialogue with a swarm. Okay? Keep in mind that everything will be done somehow, always thinking that a potential long-term application is search and rescue. So let's start with this first topic, let's say with first set of results about autonomous navigation. And I would say this is, for me, is a typical swarm intelligence success story. In the sense is, it's simple, naturally inspired, local rules that create effective emerging behaviors, okay? The other things, let's say with interaction, will not really reflect this typical pattern that is followed in swarm intelligence. All right, so navigation is a fundamental capability in a mobile robot system and in a mobile robot swarm. And needs to be safe, both for humans and robots, efficient, also in crowded situations. Somehow it's easy to be efficient in sparse situations, but in crowded situations, and if we are talking about a swarm, we could expect to have a crowd somehow. It should be somehow acceptable by humans, meaning a human should not feel like threatened by the presence of a swarm. That could be, because if I see like a bunch of robots coming towards me, say, hey guys, what are you doing, right? So how do we implement this? Well, the idea was, hey, since we are talking about humans, why don't we use the same rules that pedestrians use to navigate? Because this could be, actually, if you use the same rule, we can have, in principle, a sort of human-like path. So accessibility should be there somehow. We can have efficient sharing of space, because we are pretty efficient in the way we navigate our spaces. And also, we can get this emergence of macroscopic crowd behaviors that we are able to show in certain situations. So the idea was to collaborate with Guy Terarats, he's at Alpen-Adria-University in France, together with Dirk Helbing and Musahid. He did some work to try to understand what kind of rules human pedestrians adopt in very crowded situations, okay? So basically they were studied things like this, observing that actually spontaneously there is a formation of flow lines, okay? This is, for instance, Shibuya crossing in Tokyo. The first time I saw that, I was like freezing, because say, what's going on here? In Italy, you would never ever have such ordered solution of a problem where basically they are all crossing and there is no congestion in the middle. But the idea was, so observing what's going on, they realized that humans use a sort of like what they call a cognitive heuristic, which is based on some neural patterns that allows to estimate in real time what is the free horizon before collision. Okay? Indeed, it's very simple. What happens? This is with robots. So the blue robot is navigating towards its target. So I want to go there. Then it sees another robot moving in opposite direction. It estimates, we do it, based on visual perception, the direction of the incoming robot. Then for each possible directions heading in its field of view, we, and our robots, what they do is to compute the maximal distance they could travel at optimal speed, meaning as I was in the free space, before colliding with the obstacle. Then, based on this, so create this frontier, it chooses on this frontier as a desired direction the ones that takes the closest to the target. Super simple, right? And this is what happens. If you look at the things, so this was like basically the cognitive heuristic rule that we engineered, adapted to robotics. And okay, the situation when you put equations and things get a bit more complex, but in the end, it's a very, very simple, rule. Of course, we need to add the notion of safety or social margins. So a robot, this is like a human. So these are two obstacles moving, and this is like the frontier which is being created. And this is, for instance, the point that is closest to the target before a collision would happen. And the collision is accounting for the fact that there is a sort of like social or safety margin around the robot. And the speed is set to go to this direction in order to reach it as fast as possible, at the same time being able to stop in case of collision would happen. Why would happen collision? Because I'm estimating that this guy is going straight linearly, but if he changes direction, his mind, then there is the risk of a collision. So I need to be cautious. Adopting, so if we adopt this, you would say, come on, I mean, this is very simple. Why should work? Why should be interesting? Well, it's quite interesting because what you observe as a result are amazing. So the first way to evaluate the performance has been as according to the ways people usually evaluate navigation algorithm in robotics with certain, let's say, pathological situation. One pathological situation is this: when you have the robots in a circle and each robot has to reach the opposite direction with respect to the center. This is not obvious because, of course, you get like a big congestion in the center. So if you see what happens here, is quite nice. Observe what the kind of very smooth swingling happens. And then they are able to solve the complex situation. This is with 50 robots quite effectively. This is the situation with the periodic corridor. Okay, so that enters here and goes out here. You see that after a few seconds, basically there is the spontaneous formation of ordered flow lines. This is, I think, I find it beautiful. Also, when you have heterogeneity in the behavior. So these guys have the same model as the robots, but are humans, meaning they are bigger, they are move faster, they are more tolerant for touching, because for us it's not a problem to touch each other. And again, there is a spontaneous formation of ordered flow lines. This was beautiful in the sense, if I would tell you the rule that we started from and say you will get these behaviors, hey, we were really surprised to obtain this kind of smooth behaviors. They say, okay, but well, this is a typical thing in swarm robotics. Things are beautiful, but then if you try to compare it with a state-of-the-art algorithms, it doesn't work equally well. No, that's not true. This is what nice part of the story. But first, I want to show you that also with real robots, we get the same results. And actually, we made extensive experiments, and it's amazing that the performance with real robots and simulation are overlapping. So meaning that, hey, wait, yeah, we are writing nice simulation, but also that the rule is very robust to all the problems of sensing that you have from reality to simulation. This is what you get in the circle scenario. Keep in mind that these guys are moving and relocating only based on odometry. They are very small. These are footbots. So if they don't go back to the exact position, it's not because something's wrong, but because their odometry is not like great. And also this is like another situation which is pretty interesting. Typical is a cross. Basically, there are half of the robots move between these two targets and half between this. So basically, this creates a congestion in the very center. Again, we can get like a quite very nice organized behavior and with high throughput. If you see some robots going wrong because they use vision to detect the colors, and again, they have like, they process 3 frames per second and their ability is not that good. But overall, the performance is quite good also with the real robots. And also when we compare them with true, real state-of-the-art algorithms for robot navigation, the performance is better. Here is the performance of our human-like approach compared to velocity, reciprocal velocity, obstacle avoidance algorithms that are the state-of-the-art. And you see that it works better smoothly, and actually this results in higher throughput. So the ability to do this more times in the same time span. The difference is even more marked when we consider the periodic corridor. You see that in our case, again, the spontaneous formation of flow lines allows for a very fluid transport, I would say, while this does not happen at all for the competitors. And in general, when we have been like comparing our approach with state-of-the-art, with more standard, let's say, settings, the performance is, let's say, always better or comparable. And this was a very nice thing because in the end, with a very simple rule, based on observing humans, we can get something that has state-of-the-art performance and also shows a clear self-organization and emergence of behaviors. But okay, what if, for instance, it's too crowded? Or different robots have different priorities, different requirements. Deadlocks happens because we can't move. Well, somehow we would need ad hoc solutions in our algorithms and also in the other algorithms to sort out these situations effectively. But this is not what we want. And then we said, how can we do? Well, and we had like this nice idea, we like it again, to actually include in our system artificial emotions. So what is artificial emotion? I say, come on, this is like a little overused thing. But actually, the idea of artificial emotion is the same, it works for us. It's a way, so if you see me like this, what do you get? You get that kind of like not in good mood. So basically, you try to keep away, because if you start coming to me, maybe I can start shouting back to you. And so it's a way to have fast, informative communication in one shot. You just see one frame. And also, if I'm like in bad mode, my behavior will be modulated accordingly. So maybe I start making everything wrong and doing, acting according to my emotion. So the idea is actually to use this to modulate and to communicate in a very cheap way inside a robot's world. Okay, we actually developed a quite, well, maybe overly complex model, but the idea is in the end very simple. According to the external situation, each robot has an internal state, and this internal state defines the value, let's say, of a vector of emotions. So we have a set of predefined emotions. The value, the intensity of each emotion is defined by the internal state, and as I said, this actually act as a modulator on the behavior. And the strongest of this emotion is actually published, so made available also to the other. Just to give you like an idea how we apply this in the case of navigation is, okay, in terms of emotions, we consider these 6 ones. Neutral, okay, no emotion, you have just your normal behavior. Fear, something's wrong and you feel like anxious, let's say. Confusion, hey, I don't know what to do. For instance, confusion is like I start having many changes of direction. If I'm surrounded by a lot of people, I start like moving a bit erratically. So I'm sort of like I'm confused. Or okay, urgency, I need to get there in 10 seconds. I'm late. I need to go straight and fast. Frustration, oh, I need to go there, but I can't move it. And so on. So these are the emotions, make sense, let's say, in navigation context. And what is the internal states or the external conditions that would activate such an emotion? Okay, for urgency, I said it. For the confusion, for the fear, can happen anything. Like I don't have free space. I have frustrated neighbors around me that then move a bit erratically. I experience many changes of directions, or I have neighbors with urgency. And what is the modulation effect? The modulation effect is like, for instance, if I fear, I will increase my field of view because I need to get more information in order to get out of this embarrassing situation. At the same time, I slow down because, well, the situation is not favorable to me. Or in the case of urgency, I do the opposite. Instead of wasting my time and considering what's going on, well, I need to go there. So I restrict my field of view, which is like tendency to go just straight. I restrict my social margin. I don't care if I bump into somebody. Somebody should care, not bumping into me. And, well, caution, who cares? So these are like behavior modulations. These are these external states that set the activation of the emotion. So if we could plug this in our system, of course, this is not limited to navigation. What we get is quite nice. For instance, this is the circle. And then these guys are yellow that are actually frustrated. And these guys have fear. It's frustrated because they are on the borders and they can't get where they need to go. And the guys that have fear, actually, they are fear because they are surrounded by many other robots. And you say, okay, it looks like similar to the other. No, it is not, because when we do the computations, if we take the other algorithm with no emotions, increasing the number of robots that makes this situation more and more difficult, because here the congestion increases a lot. Basically, the throughput, so the number of times we can do this in a certain time span, with the normal approach decreases with a strong slope. While if you use like our emotion, the decreases is very much more graceful. So meaning, why? Because instead of like trying to do something, if I'm frustrated, the behavior of frustrating is trying to go to some open space. So not trying to go back to the congestion. If I have fear, I try to be more cautious and not try to keep like bumping and having my normal behavior. So the overall effect is actually very beneficial. And even in this cross scenario, you will see randomly some robots get urgency. So they need to go fast to their target. See these robots, if you look at their trajectories, they are actually quite straight. So basically, they are able to perform their task with high priority, precisely because the others perceive this information, they get this emotional information, and they adapt, they modulate the behavior accordingly. And again, what we get is a strong, very significant improvement of performance over the baseline, so with no emotions. So what was the conclusion of this? I show like something about autonomous navigation, taking like a typical swarm approach, looking at nature, at humans, the way we navigate, the way we use our emotion in our mutual interaction. We put them together in a very simple algorithm, and performance are excellent, and also behavior are beautiful in the sense we have all this emergence behavior. But okay, let's move on. Let's go to the next level. So now our swarm can navigate safely and effectively and possibly interacting well with the human in terms of navigation. But we are still, in order to go this mixed initiative interaction, we need something to communicate to the swarm. So we have to work out some bidirectional interaction means. So I will show a gesture-based vocabulary that we have developed to interact to RoboSwarm. So first, okay, I don't think I have to convince very much you why using gestures makes sense to interact with robots. But I want to point out that in the case of a robot swarm, is even more important than a single robot. Because with a single robot, somehow, we know that we're talking to each other. We know that we are interacting. But with the multitude, I need to actually to point out, to select to whom I'm talking to select individuals, to select groups. And also, I want to use, if I need to indicate spatial directions or spatial entities, well, if I use hands and gestures, it's quite natural. Think about, for instance, just using speech, encoding the fact that you should take the second door there to escape. While on the other hand, it's much easier to say, hey, just move over that door. Okay? So this is to say that the use of arm and gestures is pretty natural and useful, especially in the case of robot swarms. So what we did was, again, thinking about search and rescue, to define a gesture language intended for expressing high-level plans and control. And also, we put a very simple grammar there. Basically, the idea is interaction goes in step. In the first step, I'm using some gestures for addressing all robots or some robots or individual robots. Then, after I made the selection, the step 2 is to tell the robots what to do. Then the idea, of course, is to associate some gestures to actions. In this case, we had in mind flying robots and search and rescue, so it was natural to say, okay, you take off or land or search, okay? And then we need to use some parameters to express, for instance, hey, you now go and search there for 5 minutes, okay? So I need to add this information, and we use finger counts in this way. And then also, we need to have like a sort of like yes or no feedback. So just using this very simple thing, we can provide basic high-level plans to the swarm. But in order to actually make this effective, the swarm needs to understand the comments, right? So we first had to develop something to make the swarm acting as a distributed sensor and be able to classify and take decisions in a collective way. Because if I say this, you should understand to who I'm talking to and what I'm interested you to perform. Well, the idea is actually the swarm as a distributed sensing classification system works pretty well because, as I said here, even if you have like a number of robots that have not powerful each one, but when we put all together, the effect can be very powerful. So they can work as a single augmented sensor. But of course, they need some form of coordination and consensus. In order to let the robots classifying the gesture, we adopted just a state-of-world approach. So basically, we use a supervised learning, and then we give a statistical classifier to each robot. The interesting part is we could exploit the presence of a swarm to gather a training set very fast. So here, actually, Jawad is moving, so showing like finger count 3, and then showing under many different view angles. So in a very short time, precisely exploiting the presence of a swarm, we could gather a huge, massive training set to be used to train. We use both a combination of convolutional neural network and a support vector machine, or we just use like directly uncasted features and SVM. In the case of convolutional neural network, it was used just to extract automatically features for recognizing the gestures. And we have also, considered an online supervised learning approach. That was very nice, actually, was in Valencia, where we said people, hey, what gesture you want to teach to the robots? And then they were just on the spot, 2-3 samples, and then the system could learn and then use these gestures in order to provide some comments. So let me see how much time I have?
Sorry?
How much time do I have?
We have still about 5 minutes.
All right. All right.
Some time for questions, but it's okay.
Okay. So maybe I will go a bit faster. So basically, this shows that we implemented a distributed consensus system. Basically, the idea is every robot uses classifier, issue an opinion. So basically, a probabilistic vector assigning the gesture to some class. And then this information is actually propagated the multi-hop way in the ad hoc network, in the robot ad hoc network. And they keep acquiring images. And then when there is some evidence, statistical evidence from the part of one robot based on all the samples, says, hey, yes, is actually class 4, then this robot issues a decision. So for me, is class 4. And this is then propagated to the swarm. Okay? Then you will say, well, but you might have competing or different decisions. Sure. The point is, they will be propagated in the swarm. This guy might say it's class 1, but then each decision has attached a confidence. They will be propagated in the swarm, and then eventually they will meet somewhere. They will compete. The decision assessed with higher confidence will win, and they will eventually be propagated to all the swarm. So it works pretty well. And it works pretty well the fact that actually using a robot swarm to perform gesture classification using vision allows to reach very high accuracy in gesture recognition. For instance, if I use 20 robots in less than 1 second, I can get around 85% of gesture accuracy. This is what I would get with one single robot. So it was pretty satisfying because controlling time is actually this parameter lambda. So controlling the way the decision is being assessed, we can reach super high swarm accuracy. And basically what we want is the higher the number of robots, the better the accuracy, which is what we observe here. So let me show actually a bit of system. The robot this is the visual marker that is used actually to perform the follow him. You don't hear, but actually the robot, they were doing beeping every time somehow to confirm that they got the command. So now, responding, this is like confirming that got this, and go there and wait, and then for 3 meters. And then this guy is actually, while this one didn't get anything, he's following the feet. Now they are there, looking, and then the command is for robots, they react, and then land. So this is a very simple example, actually, how to use both a very basic feedback from the robot and this gesture language to perform basic tasks. We have been doing other things, like selecting groups of robots. And it works pretty well. It works pretty well because here the computation is done on a computer, not on board. The fact that they go up is precisely to provide the feedback that they have received the command. Okay, you say, well, maybe it doesn't look impressive, but actually it was pretty difficult to achieve real time, to make this, the robots recognizing, using vision to recognize the thing. This is what actually the robots are seeing. We can do also something with small robots, which is also cherry picking. Again, this is done using distributed consensus in a distributed way. They are understanding which robot is being pointed to. All right, looks good, but actually has some strong limitation. A strong limitation in the sense, this is based on the fact that robots will recognize what I'm doing, right? So it is vision-based, which would not work really well, for instance, outside if I want to do search and rescue, okay, for visibility issues or because the situation is cluttered, and also somehow requires a constant attention from the robot to catch my gestures, which is not what I want. The robot should do its own task, not looking at me waiting for something. And also, I can hardly express complex things. So the idea was to move on, is to use a wearable system. So to use a multi-modal system integrating speech recognition, a 3D arm configuration gestures plus hand gestures. This is the system that we built. Basically, this is based on speech. We are just using the Microsoft API. And then we have two wearable. This is like a Mio armbands from Lakeside Labs. They have an IMU, EMG, plus vibration, and the guy has some CPU on board. So the idea is to change the situation from the robots being recognizing, classifying my gesture, to the fact that everything that I issue is fused and decoded on board of me, and is just transmitted to the robot via wireless, local wireless. So I have full control, and this goes over all the problems of visibility and so on. Of course, each modality has its scope. Basically, the hand gesture are used, for instance, to do some simple mobility controls or to perform iconic commands. The arm gestures, again, they are used to indicate directions or entities or robots. And the speech, well, anything else that does not fit here. So any complex command. So actually, I can now say something, move to the collapsed houses and search for survivors for 30 minutes. And I can indicate the collapsed houses. Then the robots can get the point where the collapsed houses are, and then the rest that has to move there and search for survivors, I can reasonably and effectively say it by using speech. So let's see the system at work, and then this is the last thing. Huh?
Number 12.
Number 12 selected.
Go there.
Now the robot is identified through the ID, number 12. Okay, so he knows that he is the number 12. Okay, but then there is the case when so it says you, and the U is the one which is pointed to, and they talk to each other, and the other two are autonomously selected by proximity. So this is like self-organizing autonomous behavior from the swarm side. And then we can use actually hand gestures to do simple mobility control. So while they're moving, we can actually steer the entire group by simple hand commands, which is very handy and useful, I would say.
Manual control switch off.
Of course, I can do what I was doing before. So I can do multiple individual selections. Again, this is, you see, it's pretty fast and very precise in the selection.
Robots 13, 57, 58 are on their way.
Of course, what I want to do is also to point out, so
Tracking started.
this is like, okay, just a modality to do the same as before, but let's say in a more handy way, in a more automatic way. But again, it shows how precise we are able to do just combining the information from the two wearables. And this happens in real time with these guys, okay? Because now everything is computed on board of this and not is performed on board of these guys that are not really powerful.
Cancel. Tracking stopped.
Also, we can select groups.
Select group.
You see now the armbands are in both arms, precisely to select a cone, and everything that falls inside this cone is being automatically selected.
Select group.
And again, it gets quite precise.
Go there.
Yeah, I know this is not so much exciting, this go there, but okay, this is a lot of... We can also do an heterogeneous team. So now we are including a parrot in the same swarm, because in the end nothing changes, because now everything is on board of this guy.
Go there.
Robot 32 is on its way.
Number 60. Go there.
Okay, it's a bit disastrous, but what is very nice,
Number 12.
look what happens.
Go there.
There where the position of the arm doesn't indicate any direction.
Please correct it.
And the system is actually understanding this and say, hey, this is
Go
wrong.
to that red box.
I wanted anything.
Go to that red
This
box.
is very, very nice, because basically by fusion, different modalities, the system can understand if the tried out command makes sense. So it gives like much robustness to the entire system. Okay. Let's skip this and just the conclusions. Well, I gave some tour of research I did on 2 words I said, mixed initiative use more systems. And showed some building blocks, so the autonomous navigation, collective sensing and learning, gesture vocabulary, multi-modal wearable interaction systems. The idea is like one day all this can be part of real mixed initiative system. But frankly speaking, I see still a long way before real world deployment. Ongoing work is actually using mixed team navigating, exploring highly cluttered and known environments. The idea will be, for instance, to have like a bunch of robots and to tell them, hey, there is like a narrow passage. So I use my cognitive ability and they self-organize in order to prepare to pass the narrow passage. So not waiting for the narrow passage happening, but using my help to do this. And do this also to navigate in very cluttered and very difficult environments. Last is actually, I just got funded with Qatar National Research Foundation, this project on themes of aquatic and aerial robots for monitoring of Gulf waters. So the idea will be actually to work out coordination and international cooperation scheme in this very exciting environment. If somebody has something with this, please talk to me. I'll be very happy to collaborate. Sorry for the extra time, and I hope you enjoyed, and if you have questions now or offline, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Gianni, for this really amazing talk.
Thank you.
There are for sure some questions. If not now, maybe during the coffee break. So we can start it and we'll then continue 11:15. Okay, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks. No question?
Yeah,
okay.
okay, sorry.
I don't need a mic. I think that's for...
It's just for the...
So my question is, why the hand gestures? Because in the field of application that you described, you would like to have your hands freely available for gear, whatever this is. So if you have to point with your hands all the time, you cannot carry some other tools. Why not head movement or eye tracking or something that allows you to have your hands free?
I was talking to the profession, to the guys from civil protection, and the idea is to provide high-level plans, right? So it's not like I'm controlling the robots all the time. So the idea is, I'm here, I see something there is a robot, hey you, go and search there. It's an interaction that lasts 1 second, okay? And then back to doing my job. The point is those guys, they are professional, but they use their hands, okay? So they said, please, don't think about giving us devices or complex things, because hands are easy. Voice, hands, we know how to use it. And was precisely a request from them, not give us complex things. We don't want to, we already have too many things to work. It's like just using hands. The idea is precisely to have sporadic interactions by using hands. If I would do like a continuous control, I totally agree with you, that didn't make any sense. But just sporadic controls, I think hands and voice together are the best thing. You can keep like working and say, 3 robots go to the dark room. You keep doing it. Not convincing.
Yeah, I was just wondering, if you're a medic, for example, you probably need to hold stuff in your hands. And then, if you have to drop them somewhere in the mud, and then you, just for making some hand gestures, in these situations, you have something in your hands usually.
Sure.
Which then disturbs maybe the interpretation.
Yeah,
of
but
the
then
hand
also you don't want to
gestures.
have also UIs at
So
this
this-
point.
yeah.
So maybe voice. So it's it depends definitely on the application.
You will have the other robots holding the equipment.
Good point.
Another question right now?
You showed this human-level collision avoidance algorithm where we saw the circle scenario and where we saw the corridor.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the assumptions. What does a single robot know of the other ones, and how do they censor that?
Yeah, what they do is actually, we've been running this line with those small footbots. So basically they use vision. They just see. So the assumption is they can detect mobile obstacles, okay? And then just derive an estimate of their velocity vector. The point is this is done repeatedly. So at the beginning the estimate is very rough, but then you keep like adjusting and recomputing your frontier over time. But the only assumption is I can detect visually a moving obstacle or even a static obstacle. If it is moving, I need to keep doing it in order to estimate the velocity vector. That's all.
In the simulation where you showed or modeled emotional behavior, there showed up something like pairs of robots following closely one another. Why is that?
Well, I don't know.
They were close, following each other for a certain time, then split up, then others form pairs.
But there was like in the cross scenario. Well, in the cross scenario, the idea was actually that somehow they had to give way. So their behavior is to give way to the robots with priority. Okay. So actually, in order to give way to somebody with priority that's coming, like a train, bullet, then it might make sense that if we are close by, we will have the same behavior moving in the same way. Okay, so it might happen that actually they get, let's say, a bit clustered together. Yep.
So I was wondering regarding, you have some objects, some robots that are moving in one direction and some are still standing around, so to say. My question is, is the behavior pattern that the standing elements are having, is it changing when others are moving? So to say, so the guys who are standing at the beginning, they are homogeneous in what they can do. Once some move, then you start to have a heterogeneous system.
Okay.
So those guys who are still standing, are they also updating their behavioral pattern because you now have a heterogeneous system, or are they staying with the same behavioral pattern as if all of them would be homogeneous?
You're referring when I use emotions, or
so it
because
rather applies any kind of
because when I use
heterogeneity.
emotions, yes, definitely, because my emotional state depends on my environment, the situation around me. Okay, so definitely, if there is like change in the situation around me because I start moving, this definitely will create a change in emotional state. In the other case, actually not, because I don't care if what is moving or not moving is a static object, is a human, or is a chair. For me, is every time I need to recompute this frontier, and that's all.
So when you showed this corridor example and you set up your rule of rotation change, did you observe that humans were doing it in a similar way? Was there a study on how the humans that were observed are doing this on the microscopic level?
Yeah, I mean, the cognitive heuristic is a model, is a mathematical model derived from the observation of the humans. So actually, since, I mean, what we did was actually to use the study on human behavior, so a model of human, of pedestrians, in order to bring this into robot. So actually, in fact, what was published in the PNAS was precisely a model of how we do, and was specifically addressed to model a crowded situation. So actually, we were not sure it would work nicely in sparse situations, because it was aimed precisely to reproduce, to understand what happens when you have a crowd and then this spontaneous line formation.
There are two ways to approach that: to observe this macroscopic behavior and then come up with a rule that produces the same or a similar macroscopic behavior, or really extracting the properties of each human, how it is turning, and then coming up with a model from that. So which?
No, what was the first. In fact, you see, was like observing heads and trying to have like some macroscopic model in order to say, okay, was from macroscopic to microscopic, in order to get the point what was the individual behavior that was able to make those global behaviors, but was observing at a global level. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you use an external camera system for position detection?
The only case when we use a position was in the last video, but okay, was simply just to identify the relative position of the robots with respect to the human. Then with the gesture identify a 3D vector, but let's say I know where the robot is. That's all. Actually, I didn't show it, was one slide I skipped. We went over this problem because it's totally unrealistic. And so the idea is actually to have this guy, so to have a camera here with a laser pointer. So basically with the camera and laser pointer, I point. The laser pointer allows me to precisely point where I want, because actually we discovered, it was pretty funny at the beginning, that as humans, we totally overshoot. When I point something, if you actually then take the vector, it's totally wrong. And there are a lot of studies about this. And they say, come on, I'm pointing there, why it doesn't work? And then we realize that, hey, let's use the tracker and say, yeah, it's wrong, of course, you're not pointing the right way. So the idea is to have a laser pointer, so I can actually see what I want to point to, and then use the camera. And then I acquire the relative position. So basically, M, including the position of the robot in my local frame of reference. And also, I can do all the other robots. Actually, we are using the TF in ROS to do this. And then we have trees of frame of reference all connected together. And this can work also outside. Of course, in order to make this working, we are using these visual markers, and the visual markers also, each face encodes the position of the robot. So if I see it from here, I know that actually it's in front of me, or that the robot is on this side.
Just a question about how they are characterized, the different emotion-based behaviors. Did you say are somehow fixed patterns or evolving partners? I was wondering, for instance, whether you have fear, maybe you slow down too much and the impact on the swarm is bad. So how you have fine-tuned these
yeah, sure.
parameters?
Somehow having a behavior modulation, you can frame it as a parameter setting problem, right? Basically, we moved this general parameter setting problem to using an, let's say, emotional model that is also nice and easier also to understand instead of having parameter A, B, and C. But in the end, the problem stays there because to which extent having fear should slow me down or increase the safety margin, this is like something that definitely would be a matter of like learning this according to the situation and trying to precisely to evolve it. But now it's like totally fixed.
My question is regarding the navigation for aerial robot outdoors. So if they're outdoors, how would you do the gestures and navigation in 3D space? So how would they avoid collisions in 3D space, and how would you gesture them to, for example, move to certain distance or whatever?
Yeah, okay. The point is, okay, we moved to use the wearable precisely because if I have vision-based and I want to use it outdoors, then I'm subject to all the issues about illumination, right? But apart from this, let's say, apart from this, there is no difference with indoor. By the way, outdoors, I might also enjoy the GPS that can also be used to have a relative position and so on. Anyway, if I use this system, the system is precisely designed to be used outdoors. There is like one video that I showed when this has been used to control Starlet robot at ETHZ, which is the dog of Polytechnic of Zurich, precisely going outdoors, so steering and so on. So this would make the system robust, definitely.
One more question? Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, Gianni, for answering all those questions. And
Yeah.
if there are more, I think it's okay
Yeah,
for you.
I'll be around, yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you very much.